our live stream today. Look, we're in Miami-Dade, the great Miami, in the city of Aventura, and today is February 18th, 2026. Today's live stream is about awakening critical thinking. How cool is that? Completing the brain movement. Look at that. Awakening critical thinking, completing the brain movement. There are some movements in the brain that without this movement in the brain, your critical thinking doesn't occur. Complex subject, cool subject, good subject for us to talk about, and a good subject to free you and free me, freeing me from what I think I have critical thinking skills for when I don't. I've already lost my critical thinking skills, and I'm going to explain that to you slowly today, very calmly, to understand what critical thinking is. First important thing. Look, we are whole, body, skin, bones, blood, whole, brain, mind, consciousness, all one thing. It's a single block. When a piece is missing, things are compromised, and the body stabilizes in what is centralized in that force that gives energy to the body, that helps the body, that nourishes and cleanses the body. So, this whole, we are whole. In my definition of consciousness, I say in a complex way that consciousness is the movement that is perceived in the metabolism produced. What does this mean in practice? Consciousness depends on the movement in the brain, and the brain in the whole body, heart, lungs, everything together. It's a movement, and consciousness comes from there. We will arrive at critical thinking. We will awaken critical thinking. The brain, of course, doesn't move in the way we're going to describe it. Brain movement is the brain's function, the flow of information back and forth. That's what I call brain movement. The mechanical movement of the brain is small, but this functional movement of functions happening in the brain is significant. For consciousness to appear, your body has to be in a certain state of well-being, your brain has to be functioning and communicating with a certain level of daily brain functions, and even then, at times, consciousness doesn't appear. For example, when you're in deep sleep, you're not conscious. When you're in a coma, you're not conscious. You're not conscious because consciousness depends on inter-area brain movements. Okay, consciousness. Even having consciousness, we're still going to talk about critical thinking. Even more complicated, right? Which is critical thinking within consciousness. Critical thinking is something that, just look, I'm going to change the subject and then come back to it. The most interesting thing is that it's about returning to the subject. I'm going to change it and then come back to it. Critical thinking has a lot to do with something I'm going to tell you: innocence versus naivete. Are you naive or are you innocent? Look, I'm innocent. Look, I'm naive. Innocence is always wanting to learn more. You want to learn more and you're never content. You're always exploring. Naivete, I already know. A simple way of putting it: in your naivete, you lost your critical thinking skills. In innocence, you have critical thinking skills. In naivete, you've lost your critical thinking skills, but you're quick. Oops, you're quick. In innocence, you have critical thinking skills, but you're slow, which is better. We are fragmented beings in life. We have fragments of innocence and fragments of genuineness. That's how it is. And when we are naive, we lose our critical sense. And when we are innocent, we regain our critical sense. Upon regaining our critical sense, we become a little slower. Why am I talking about critical thinking and the brain and brain activity now? When I do this, the noise happens, it enters the ears, and the brain sends a little signal. There is an auditory evoked potential in the brain. There is also a potential, which is the potential I sent to you, which is M mistake. A negative mistake, it's something the brain perceives that something is wrong. The brain perceives that something is wrong. It noticed that something is wrong, something that doesn't fit, something that wasn't supposed to be like that. I perceived a snake, but it's not really a snake. It was a painting, something similar. So it perceives something wrong. And when it perceives something wrong, that's close to 150 milliseconds, MMN, evoke potentials. The brain evokes the thing, it hears it, it sees it, it evokes the thing, it evokes it while it's going to process the thing. What I'm talking about here is naivete. Naivete is when part of the brain fails to process something. He will sue for innocencia, but the process will be slow. Hey, slow or fast. It'll remind you a lot of Daniel Colomy's Thinking Fast and Slow, that little book. That little book will have a lot of things in it. So here we are. What is critical thinking? Critical thinking is when the brain in full operation receives information. Consider, look, is it wrong? Is it right? There's something, there's a deviation there. At P300, it says, oops, does this deviation matter or not? At N400, 400 milliseconds, at N400, it integrates meaning, it sees if it's meaningful or not. And at P600 milliseconds later, it's a wave with a positive of 600 milliseconds. It reanalyzes and corrects. So an error that I detected in 150 milliseconds, I'll correct in 600 milliseconds. If I'm innocent, if I'm naive, no. Good critical thinking, innocence. I sometimes say it like this: maturity with innocence. That's the crux of the matter, because I need the completeness of the brain's movement. The brain needs to move with the evoked potentials correctly to evoke your critical thinking. Otherwise, you don't have critical thinking. Jackson, I don't understand. I don't understand everything either, but he's talking about what's happening, and the things I've learned this week and in previous weeks are accumulating. So let's take it slowly. Remember, I always said something yummy for you, yummy. It's ancestral knowledge that we have in tribes within Brazil. They use this term Iahami. I forgot the name of the tribe now of this indigenous people. And Iahami means the following: you will imitate the hunt in order to hunt later. And I extended the term Iahami, which is the following: the baby will imitate speech, will imitate gestures, will imitate walking, will imitate, so that you can then practice this imitation. The process of imitation creates habits, creates customs, creates belief, creates faith, and creates high performance. In the act of imitating, in the act of doing that, you can be within a community and you are free to do those things. And you go into a community and you need to have a sense of belonging. Belonging is fundamental to having a free critical sense, and free will too, but critical sense, if you don't feel you belong to a community, critical sense is difficult. But if belonging to a community requires you to accept a dogma, or requires you to have a common enemy in the community, otherwise you are not accepted, you lose your critical sense. Charles, explain again, and I'll explain with other examples until it all fits. You're learning to ride a bicycle, learning to ride a bicycle, you go there, it's difficult and all that. You pedal, you balance, you don't balance, and so on. Suddenly, you've learned to ride a bicycle well. You rode a bicycle well, and now you're riding a bicycle very fast. Riding a bicycle reduces your feelings. You ride a bicycle well because you're standing on a piece of learning you've acquired. We are fragments, we are junk pieces, little bits upon little bits. I learn this, I learn that, and I keep putting the little pieces together in my life. And with some of these pieces of life that I've learned, on top of that piece, I lose my critical sense. based on what I've learned, because when I learn something, I speed up, I do things faster. And when I do things faster, I lose critical thinking because the brain needs all the movement. And it's a little slow for it to have critical thinking. It needs that quiet time. Oops, it detected the deviation. Oops, 300 milliseconds, 150 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds later it says, oops, important or not important, or at 400 milliseconds, oops, what's the meaning of this, or at 600 milliseconds it reanalyzes, changes the meaning. It wasn't a snake, it was a painting. Done, I'm calm. It wasn't this, it's that. And laughs at the joke. 600 milliseconds. I reinterpreted it, I laugh at the joke. But I had time for that. When do you not have time to be critical? If you're listening to a newspaper or a television news program and it's like this, you won't have even a second to reflect on the last sentence. So, to see if you have critical thinking skills while listening to any news program or video, you stop, hold the last sentence in your head, and and then you notice, you detect a certain deviation, you determine if it's important or not, you integrate the meaning, reanalyze and correct it. That newspaper doesn't want you to correct anything. It wants what's being said to fit into your rigid narrative of life. So it goes straight into your brain as important information that reinforces your previous belief. All belief is a loss of critical thinking about it. Point. In every belief system, I, Jackson, lose my critical sense. I believe in neuroscience, I believe in politics, I believe in religion, I believe in such and such. I have faith in all of that. This belief leads to a loss of critical thinking at the very moment I believe. I believe in family, in the values of the Brazilian family. I lose my critical thinking skills because of my beliefs, because my belief is a prerequisite. Since I'm going to skip P300, I'm going to skip N400 because I've already established this narrative. I lose my critical sense. Jackson, is there a problem with losing critical thinking? No, no, I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm simply saying that you lose critical thinking. So, regarding what I already consider my truths, my customs, my beliefs, I, Jackson, from now on, from this past week until now, will begin to acknowledge that where I hold on to my belief in what is true, where I hold on to my customs, my faith, my high performance, I will acknowledge that at that moment I have lost critical thinking. Why have I lost critical thinking? Because the brain in those moments isn't going to trigger the P300, the N400, or the P600 to correct, reanalyze, and fix this problem. Because for me, it's not the problem. I've already adopted it. It's my belief, my habit, my faith. It's my high performance. So if you have high performance in playing or singing or doing a floor exercise like skating, right? I watched the Winter Olympics recently and I thought they were fantastic. When you have these high abilities, at that moment of high ability, there's no critical sense. And then the coach, who sometimes wants to change a musician's or athlete's approach, to change an attitude mid process, sees that it's a huge difficulty because the athlete lacks critical thinking skills at the high performance level. I have to take them out of the high performance level, slow down the process very slowly, calmly, because you're doing this for that reason. Because now at the high performance level, you are naive, you're very fast, you think fast, think fast, think fast. So the brain has no way to self correct nor to show the difference. It simply goes, and it's important at some moments to just go. But there are times when you'll enter a certain community and you want to feel a sense of belonging. Belonging is important to everyone, and you want to feel that sense of belonging. And when you arrive in that community, there's a little problem. Look, you come in here, we'll accept you, but you have to accept that the great enemy is Satan, the devil. That's the great enemy. By accepting that, lacking critical thinking skills about Satan, where I learned this when I exorcised the demon and Satan from my life, was with Father Quevedo. Father Quevedo is a priest who taught me parapsychology, and he showed in the Bible, in the text of the Bible, that that interaction with demons is a psychiatric episode and so on of individuals, and that there really wasn't a demon. So, but look, if any community accepts you, to accept you, you have to create an enemy. The enemy is this one, the demon, or that one, Zazino Bastiao. So you lose your critical sense there. Because the community doesn't care what you think or who you are. It's in your best interest that you'll be just another one, lacking critical thinking skills on this point. And sometimes you go because you get it. Gosh, I need to be accepted. So let's go. Let's do this. Okay, okay. What happens when something called carnival is called that? The big event, the big parties, the big gatherings of people, something very powerful and very interesting happens, which is that when you have a sense of belonging and you come together with all these people and you feel like you belong to them. For example, there was the Super Bowl here in the United States, and in the middle of it, there was a show by Bad Bunny. Ed Byrne put on a show demonstrating that America is all of us. It encompasses all countries. Latin America is an America that has to do with Portugal, France, and Spain, and Anglo-Saxon America has to do with the United States and Canada. Okay, Anglo-Saxon Latin America, but America comes from Amerigo Vespucci, which includes everyone. Okay, but before Amerigo Vespucci came here, we had ancestral knowledge. We had understandings of what is right and what is wrong. We also had groups of people organized into larger and smaller communities. And the definition of family that we have today is something canned from Europe to here. We didn't have these concepts of family, the idea that we have a man, a woman, and children. And this concept of family is much more vivid now. A marriage, a man and a woman in a first marriage, and children. It's kind of mixed up, it's kind of canned, and that's fine. What's wrong with that? But here's the next point. This is a concept that you have. And when you adopt this concept, you have a bias. Critical in the concept you adopted. Is there a problem with adopting it or not? Of course not. Of course not. Okay, a family like that, everything's fine. But you have to know that at the moment I adopted this belief, this concept, this value, I lose my critical sense. I lose the P300, I lose the N400, I lose the P600. Hold on, since it's me. P300, N400, P600. These words are complicated for me. And neuroscience is about evoked potentials. It's the movement, the functions that the brain performs, so you have the power to correct what you perceive. But if you have a belief, that power ceases to exist in that belief, in that junk, in that part of you that believes in that, or in that custom, or in that faith, or in that habit. Our habits have a lot of, you don't have a critical sense about your habit. Your habit is your habit. Basically, it's a loss of critical sense in habit. Yes, but a habit is a cool routine that I don't need to think about. I just go and do it. That's really cool. It makes things easier. It reduces effort for me. I just go and do it more easily. I ride my bike thinking about something else because riding a bike doesn't require thinking anymore. So I lost my critical thinking skills. Do you understand? I'm just pedaling there. Unless something very different happens, something strange comes along and we correct the bike's movement, everything's fine. But you won't be using it. You won't be slow enough to think about riding a bike. You won't be slow enough to think about going downstairs, for example. If you don't know how to go down, that's fine. Then you go with innocence, and innocence gives you all the attributes. but it makes you slow. Innocence makes you slow. The naive person is already running down the low stairs. If they know how, everything's fine. If they don't know how, they'll fall. Do you understand? So innocence is always the protection you have for your life. And innocence is being open to seeing subtleties, to correcting small adjustments, to let the other person be free just as you want to be free. So in a way, you have that factor. And when you go to a big show, the Super Bowl, and in the middle of the performance, Bad Bunny comes on and says something like, show Latin American culture, showing that we Latinos are the whole, it gives Latinos goosebumps. And Latinos start to realize that, man, it's been imposed on Latinos that they are inferior. They boxed us in with the idea that we Latinos are inferior. And we're not. We're all in this together. It's all the same. And if you have the strength, you'll rise and you'll be better. But what happens? Belonging in a, like at the Super Bowl or at events like Carnival, everyone goes together. When you arrive at Carnival or at those games, if you paid for your ticket, you got in. If you arrive at Carnival, you paid for your ticket to that grandstand, you got in. Okay, nobody asked what your beliefs, your values, your habits are. You got in. You'll adapt to those customs. You won't do anything outside the rules of that environment, and you are accepted as you are. In some environments, you are not accepted for who you are. In some environments, you have to have an enemy. If you don't have an enemy, you don't exist. In some environments, for example, you have to enter and believe in life after death. If you don't believe in life after death, you can't enter the environment. During Carnival, you can believe or you cannot believe, it doesn't matter. So you are accepted with your beliefs. There are places that don't accept your beliefs, but even accepting beliefs that say yes and no, it's a loss of critical thinking. Every time I have a belief, every time I have a habit, I am losing critical thinking in that negative belief. So that's the importance I'm talking about. And comparing this, look, when you're thinking fast, this think fast, think slow thing is from Daniel Coller, a really great little book by Daniel Coller. It changed my thinking quite a bit. He analyzed judges, and when judges evaluate cases automatically, they realize that before lunch or under a certain amount of stress, the judge tends to make mistakes because they're thinking fast. Thinking fast is going on autopilot, and thinking slowly is thinking structuring. And thinking slowly has to do with the cerebral cortex engaging executive functions and seeing, exploring, and analyzing. Nothing in the brain, but fast thinking is different. It's somatosensory, it's reproduction, it's stimulus and response, and it goes fast. So it's important at some point to think fast or to do things fast, and at some other point to be innocent. Innocent enough to try to elaborate on the processes with more innocence. Every time you overload your cognitive process, you will lose the P300. It reminds me very well of a time when a nephew of mine came to me and said, Jackson, I'm going to give you a great tip. Okay, let's give you a great tip. Look, to learn much more, put the videos on speed 3. I listened, put it on speed 3. I listened and listened to the cognitive process, but in that process at speed 3, 2, or even 1.5 comma, you don't have a solid foundation, you don't have a body, you don't have critical thinking, you don't analyze, you don't. It's nothing, it's information passed on without thinking. It's like television, artificial intelligence. It's a mechanical thing. It's reason and logic only based on what depends on it, not even rational, but it goes straight through. You don't filter it, you don't see it. And then when some things start happening in society that need a slightly deeper analysis, even teenagers can't do that analysis because they don't. What is being absorbed, what is being heard, because you have to read while being, you have to listen while being, And that's innocence. It's not naivete to rush through things at 1.5, 2.5, 3 times the speed of video, thinking you're going to learn. You might even get it right on the test, no problem, but you, your body, haven't incorporated it. The body needs time, it needs space. The brain needs space for you to have critical thinking. If you throw too much information at you, there's no critical thinking. The MLM potential occurs. But this error that he detects already enters into a rigid narrative. It only confirms what you already believed. It only confirms your cognitive bias. You don't move from where you are, you remain in your beliefs because you need space in your brain. That's why I say the awakening of critical thinking completes brain movements, and brain movement needs space, real space, temporal space, you understand? So that errors can be detected, so that errors can be integrated into the meaning at N400 to decide whether or not this error is important at P300, to remake the meaning at P600 and 600 milliseconds. Look, 1 second is divided into 10 parts, okay? Around point one of the second, 1.5 or so, you detected something. Around point three, you'll decide if that detection matters or not. At point four, you see if it integrates meaning. And at point six, the sixth part of the second, you reanalyze and correct. That's where you start to understand the joke. Then at point seven, 800,000 and 5, you learn the joke and then you laugh, you giggle, okay? That laughter is important. That integration is important. It creates space and a sense of belonging. If you accept it in a community, whether within carnival or within a large football stadium, you are part of that time. And we can see that when you look at the whole picture, it has a different meaning when you're in a community and you feel a sense of belonging. We change. And this week I saw the greatest meaning of Jiwasa that Brazilian Portuguese already has and uses. Jiwasa for us is us. Sometimes you say something and we do it. We did it, we can do it, we will go. You don't conjugate the agent in the plural. The agent is something singular, but it's a singular that is an inclusive we. That's a key point. When you have a sense of belonging with the people around you, and this belonging doesn't depend on believing in a dogma or doesn't depend on having a common enemy, because if you have a common enemy, you have a bias based on the belief in that common enemy, or you have a bias in the dogma and you have to believe in it to belong to that community. So, in that moment of belonging, your brain, you're not in defense mode. Defense mode is a connectomy that's like a stone. Remember what I told you? The connectomy is like thinking fast. It's very fast. You attack, defend, or reply. It's very fast, yes, but it's very fast and lacks critical thinking. You might be attacking incorrectly, you might be defending incorrectly, and you might be replying incorrectly because you lack critical thinking, because it's too fast, because it's naive. Naivete gives you a lot of speed. Innocence makes things more human, more grounded, more you with yourself, integrating the environment around you. Just one thing. There's no, I already know, like those kids who lose 4 or 5 years. I already know, I already know, I already know. Go ahead. And it really does happen, but it goes and does it wrong because it doesn't know yet. Yes, but before it asked what it was. And then it's like, I know, I know, I know. I know is so naive. Folks, that's what I wanted to leave you with. Critical thinking is linked to innocence. Critical thinking is linked to thinking slowly. So my customs lack critical thinking, my habits lack critical thinking, my beliefs lack critical thinking, my faith lacks critical thinking, my performance lacks critical thinking, period. So when I'm performing at a high level, I have to step out of that state and measure it with critical thinking, with innocence, but I have to give my brain space. The brain has to complete movements. It's the MMN 150 milliseconds, it's the P300 300 milliseconds, it's the N400 integrating the meaning. And the EOP 600 is for you to reevaluate and correct. If you're doing things too quickly in high performance, think fast, you'll skip ahead. Your customs, your habits, your beliefs, your faith, your high performance, it will skip ahead. So at some point, you need the other person, and the other person says, let's take a look at your beliefs. Let's take a look at your faith. Let's take a look at why you have this enemy. Oh, I don't know, but I'm part of this community, and this community has this enemy. So this community has destroyed your critical thinking. That's what I wanted to leave you with, folks. Until next Wednesday.